10 years ago, I moved in with my parents and left a thriving career in animation because of OCD. Picture this. Someone you know says, "I'm so OCD about that." And for a brief moment, you wonder if that's what OCD is really like. I'm here to tell you that it's not. I have OCD, also known as obsessive compulsive disorder. OCD is categorized by obsessive thoughts followed by compulsive actions. Some people's compulsive actions can be physical things that they do, like tapping or tics, or mental stories that they replay over and over and over and over and over again. Obsessive thoughts are oppressive, and compulsive actions feel like a prison of your own making. OCD is a debilitating mental illness. It is not a joke or a punchline. 10 years ago, I left Los Angeles, California, where I had a thriving career in animation. I was a visual development artist at a Animation Guild union job, and I moved back in with my parents up near Berkeley, California. I was clocking in 9 to 6, and I was making movies every single day. It was my dream job. It was a dream come true. I'd majored in animation, and this is what I wanted. And after several internships, I really thought that this is where my career was going to go. I was accepted to the position. I moved to LA, and eventually, after living on my own, working that 9 to 6, having a commute, and getting my own pets, I had 2 wonderful rabbits. I really thought, like, okay, this is the dream. And then everything started to fall apart. Instead of living the dream, I was living a waking nightmare. When I was by myself before and after work, I was deeply struggling with OCD. I could barely get out of the door every single morning without a panic attack. I was sleeping less and less every single night because my night routines for my safety became longer and longer. Eventually, in a moment of sheer desperation, having not slept nearly enough for weeks, I called my mom. I confessed to her that everything that was going on. I confessed to her that I was struggling, and that I was struggling to sleep, and that I felt trapped in this cycle of torturing myself. In a weird way, I was lucky because the work that I was doing was contract work, which meant that eventually my contract was coming to an end. And when my contract did come to an end, they gave me the option to move on to another project or to say bye. There's a lot more complexity in that, and there's a lot of legalities in that, but essentially, I was experiencing all this stuff at home, and I hired a lawyer. She negotiated a severance package, and I left. I packed up my 2 rabbits. I moved back in with my parents, and I started what would turn out to be intensive OCD treatment. I think it's really hard to underestimate how much of a failure I felt like. I had had 4 internships in college. I had been working towards this for as long as anyone who knew me knew that I wanted to be a professional artist, and it was as if my mental health could not keep up, and I had to make a life-altering pivot to change everything that I had practiced and prepared was going to be my life. I also didn't expect for the intensive OCD treatment to be as much as it was in terms of time and daily exercises. But before I get into the OCD treatment of it all, I want to go back further than that. I likely have OCD because of a genetic connective tissue disorder. I have been open about the fact that I have a disability, that I have a dynamic disability, that some days it is dynamic and I can function pretty well, and some days it is a disability and I am disabled. And from my joints to my digestive system to the way my brain just like sits in my skull, everything in my body is loose and wobbly. Think of it like being held together with really crappy old rubber bands. They don't work, they break, they split, they even tear. They send signals to other parts of my body that are incorrect. So if the connective tissue in my body is not connecting the way that it should or functioning the way that it should, it makes sense that my brain also doesn't function the way that it should. My brain is neurodiverse likely because of this connective tissue disorder. So when I think about my life with OCD, it's not that this is something that came on and happened because I was in my 20s. This is something that I've been dealing with forever. So when I left LA and I moved back in with my parents to start OCD therapy, which is CBT, cognitive behavioral, ERP therapy, exposure response prevention therapy, I actually didn't know any of that. I didn't know that there was anything else going on. I knew that some other things didn't feel right. I was having a lot of other physical issues that weren't mental, but I didn't know any of this. I didn't understand that my health was layered. I didn't understand that I was having both mental health and physical issues, and they were exacerbating each other. As a way to cope with the fact that my body was hurting, my brain was coming up with solutions and scenarios to solve these problems. Inaccurately, my brain was trying to protect me through my OCD routines, but it was doing it completely wrong. It would get a warning signal from my body, and that would trigger anxiety, and then my brain would obsess, and I would do compulsive things to help myself, and then at the same time, none of that was actually helping any of the underlying things, which were very much underlying and bothering me physically. So it would take another 6 years before I had answers to a lot of those other things. And to this day, I am still a bit of a medical mess, and I'm always continuing to learn more. But once I got my brain in a better spot, I was able to see where things hurt and where they didn't work right. And I was also able to see where my brain was stepping in to try to protect me, and it was doing this in a faulty way. But I now have some gratitude towards the OCD because I see that it was a coping mechanism, and my brain didn't know. She was trying her best. So back to 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I moved home. I entered OCD, CBT, ERP treatment, and I did intensive OCD treatment. This was sometimes several times a week in a doctor's office with a psychologist, and every single day at home doing the exercises that we figured out together. My licensed psychologist would do all of the OCD treatment with me. So even if I was doing stuff at home, it was the stuff that we had planned and guided together. We did many sessions like traditional therapy in an office, and we also did many sessions outside of the office. We went to grocery stores. We went to like a Walgreens once. We did a lot of these things outside because I could not do that. It seems so simple, right? To go to the grocery store, to go to a drugstore. But at the time, I could barely do that without having a full-blown panic attack and leaving my cart in the middle of the store. This is something I can do now, but at the time I could not do this. So outside of the therapy sessions, I was also expected to do my homework, my ERP homework, which consisted of me reenacting my greatest fears. So that's what exposure response prevention therapy is, right? You expose yourself to your biggest, worst fears. You reenact them, you read logs and scripts of them, and then you chart how your anxiety is before, during, and after. With the scripts, I would read page-long stories of my fears, my worst fears, and then with live reenactments, I would go do the things that felt impossible to me, like going to grocery stores. I would log my symptoms before, during, and after. I would go have panic attacks in public. I did so many different things that all enabled me to be able to do them without panic attacks now. It's hard to explain to someone what OCD feels like when they don't have it. It's why I've made OCD comics about my OCD and my experience with OCD through the years. I did this as an attempt to put the struggle not just into words but also to visuals, because to me, OCD is a very visual mental illness. I initially started with the I'm So OCD comics. That these comics have been passed around the internet a lot, but they are sort of a visual representation of when you say I'm so OCD, what it actually is versus what people think it is. And I really love comics for this. They lend the visuals and the storytelling to a reader really easily. You can see and understand, especially OCD, very clearly with comics. And eventually, I made enough comics that I started to wonder what it would be like if I made a graphic novel for kids. What would it have been like if I had been diagnosed as a kid? And that's how I got Exposures. Exposures is my graphic novel about obsessive compulsive disorder. Exposures follows Peyton, a 12-year-old twin girl. Her twin sister's named Taylor. And it's about how her life has become smaller and smaller and smaller as her OCD has become bigger and bigger. This is my third graphic novel, and it is my first one that I did all by myself in terms of writing and illustrating. My last two were co-written with one of my best friends, Karen. And this one I wrote and illustrated myself, and then I had a wonderful team at my publishers to help bring it into reality. And it was colored by the amazing Rebecca Good. This book is my attempt at figuring out how to explain what OCD is like and what it would have been like to get a diagnosis and go through treatment as a kid, and how you can get your entire life. This book is told in the way I hoped to express the oppressive nature of OCD. In a long form comic, I could really do that justice. I also wanted to make it for kids because, well, I make books for kids. I really wanted to just depict a life that I wished I had had I first started having OCD symptoms when I was a little kid, but I didn't get diagnosed till I was an adult, and I wanted to give Peyton more justice with that. This book is kind of like how a person with OCD goes through OCD treatment. It is a celebration of the brain and how incredible our brain is. And without spoiling the ending, I will just say that Peyton has her whole life ahead of her, and she gets to get back to what she really loves doing and find herself. As an author and illustrator, I'm really excited for Peyton's future. If you want like a more official explanation of what's in the book, I'll just read what my publisher put on the website. Eisner nominated creator Lily Williams' latest graphic novel is an honest and heartwarming account of what it's like living with OCD and the courage it takes to confront your deepest fears. Let me tell you about the winter I had to face my fears. I used to like a lot of things when I was younger, like dancing, baking, and most of all, skiing. But as I got older, things started to change. I started to feel afraid of things like certain colors, numbers, and cracks in the sidewalk. But there was a way to manage these scary thoughts and start enjoying the things I used to. It started with something called exposure therapy. Even though it was hard at first, I learned how brave I truly am. This is the story of my OCD and how, despite the challenges, I learned to face my fears. OCD is not something you can overcome. It's not something I can overcome. It's something in the way your brain works. It's something in the way your brain's built. There might be some people out there who had a bout of OCD and they're fully past it and it never bugs them again. But for me, it's the way my body's built. It's the way my brain works, probably genetic. It is something that I am in a much better place with these days, but it is still something that I live with every single day. OCD became an issue that grew out of control for me, and it was because I attempted to insufficiently manage it for many years. I didn't know that I had it until my 20s, but I experienced it as early as I can remember. For a long time, teachers and doctors just reiterating to my parents that I was highly sensitive and anxious. I didn't know that doing everything in sets of threes was part of that system, and I really can't remember a life without OCD. My life has always been touched by OCD, and it still is. And I know now I couldn't have managed future properly without help, which is why I got help. And unfortunately for me, it took a full-blown mental breakdown to reach the point where someone took me seriously, which is the story of my life because I'm a very high-functioning person. I have to get so bad where I can't walk before someone finally believes that I'm in pain. And for me, it took that with OCD. The treatment that I eventually did was intensive and it was very time consuming. And my mental breakdown from OCD took a future that was something I thought I wanted and something I had really worked towards and tilted everything on its axis. I wouldn't say it necessarily took my future away, but it showed me that not everything is built for me and that I have to create a life that's built for me if I want my life to be more accessible, because unfortunately the world will not provide that. I left the career I wanted. I left the city I thought I'd live in forever. And I know now that the future was bright. It just took a health-induced pivot to get things on the path I wanted. OCD took a lot from me, if you look at it like that. But also, like I just said, OCD made me realize that the world wasn't accessible for me, and the world that I was living in wasn't accessible for me. It wasn't capable of providing me with what I needed to thrive. And it gave me the framework that I needed to accept uncertainty and embrace flexibility. It turns out the 9-to-6 life isn't for everyone, and it certainly isn't for me. And I figured out that jamming my anxieties and obsessions and compulsions into a rigid box that defined my life and day structure only made things harder for me. So OCD treatment actually gave me the tools I needed to explore what my future was going to be like and accept failure and embrace possibilities that I didn't know were possible. So now my life is custom tailored to me as a person, and it's custom tailored to someone who lives with dynamic disability and neurodiversity. I am my own boss. I make graphic novels for kids for a living. I get to control the stories I put out into the world. In a weird way, I am a better person for having OCD, though I would not wish it on anyone. And I don't think you need mental illness or neurodiversity to be a better person. In fact, in the polar opposite direction, I want everyone who might be experiencing this or something like this to be able to get the help that they need. It's because of OCD that I was able to make exposures. I want nothing more than to be able to help kids who might be experiencing something like this to get the help that they need in a timely manner. And I want adults to be able to also read this and have empathy for anyone suffering from OCD. My deepest hope is that this book creates empathy for those suffering from it, and that someone will read this and not have to suffer as long as I did, because they'll get some of the answers or language they need to get help. So in a lot of ways, Exposures is my gift back to the world, because I'm really hoping that it can provide that for some people. Like I said, this is a middle grade graphic novel, and you can find it wherever books are sold.
Say it louder, say it louder. Feel the moment, feel the power. Bring the animal back to life. Bring the energy one more time. If you feel like letting go, you can take control. You can turn this all to something beautiful, where you feel life gets you down, 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 gets you down, down, down. Say it louder, say it louder.